Welcome to Inspirational Leadership. I'm your guest. I'm your host, Kristen Harcourt, and I'm super excited to introduce you to another guest. Today, I am going to be speaking to you with Tony Martignetti, who is a trusted advisor, entrepreneur, idea generator, and people connector. He brings together practical experience, formal training, and extreme curiosity to elevate leaders and equip them with the tools to navigate through change and unlock their true potential. Tony is also the host of the Virtual Campfire podcast, and he's the author. For anyone who's here looking on video, I'm going to hold it up, this beautiful book. He is the author of the book, Climbing the Right Mountain, Navigating the Journey to an Inspired Life. Welcome to the show, Tony.
Thank you so much. I'm so thrilled to be here. I just feel like, you and I are kindred spirits, and inspiration is at the core of what we really believe in. And I love that. So I think
absolutely. As I was reading through your book chapter by chapter, it just felt so resonant, and again reminded me how privileged we are to be able to do this work and help people to get to this in place of really living an inspired life. Because I think for some people, they just think it's not a possibility, right? That's just for some people over here, but it's not for me. And so for us to be able to ignite that passion and inspiration in their lives, I mean, what a gift and a journey.
Yeah. I totally agree. It's for me, it is truly a blessing to be in this space. And I think about what it took to get here, and I think, wow, the trials and tribulations, and here we are doing what we're doing.
And I think that's a wonderful place for us to start, because in your book, you do authentically share your story. And as you started to even allude to, some of those trials and tribulations that got you to the journey you're on right now. And because I work with so many leaders like you and see some of the things that they experience in workplaces, and some of the ways that they just feel like this is the way it is, and this is what life is supposed to look like. And I know for you, there was maybe one moment that was the catalyst, but I think there was actually several moments. I just really like the story, and maybe we could start here when you were in that meeting and you just said, what is going on here, right? Probably not out loud, but probably internally. And there started to be a recognition, like, I'm not going to do this anymore. So I'd love to start here, and maybe you're going to bring us a little bit backwards as well to get us to how you got to that moment. But talk to me about that meeting when it felt like a really a breakthrough showed up for you.
Yeah, I love that. And one of the things I've been thinking about is how sometimes you choose words that you align with, and then they show up more pronounced as you start to tell your story. Now, my tagline for my business is inspiration through honest conversations. And when people ask me about that, I say, well, the honest conversations that you have, they start with the kind of conversations you have with yourself, for starters. And I feel like that conversation I had in that moment, which I'm going to talk about in a moment, was the first real honest conversation I had. And so let me tell the story. So there I was sitting in this boardroom, about 40 people or so in this boardroom, give or take. And I had this moment where I'd been through some issues beforehand where I was, feeling as though like maybe I'm not in the right place, but I'll continue moving on in the path of doing the work that I'm doing because it pays the bills and it's what I do. Right. But I had this moment in that boardroom where I saw leaders who were just showing up and, trying to protect their image of who's right and who's wrong. It was, what I would call toxic leadership, leadership that really is based on how am I, preserving my image in the face of everyone else. And as I listened to these leaders, I looked around the room and I saw everyone checked out, looking at their phones. Oftentimes I heard people say before this meeting that they just, that's just the way it is. That's just the way that they are. And making excuses for the way that things are. And in that moment, I said to myself, wow, I can't believe that I've arrived here in this place where I'm, accepting things as they are, and I'm collecting a really healthy paycheck, and yet I don't feel like I'm making an impact. I don't feel inspired. I don't feel like this is the life I should be living. And so I told myself, I said, I think I need to do something about this, at least for myself, but I think for other people too. And in that very moment, I said, I think I need to leave. And when I leave, I'm going to leave the room to change the room, because this room is no longer feeling like it served anybody. And that's what I did. I literally walked up. I stood up and walked out. It felt very dramatic to me, but I don't know if it was necessarily a situation where everyone was feeling like, what is he doing? What is he doing? But for me, it was very dramatic. And I definitely didn't return to that room. I did have conversations with people after the fact, and they asked me, and they said, well, what's going on? Are you going to come back? And I said, no, I'm not. I decided that I've moved on, and I'm going to do something different about the way I'm showing up in the world. So yeah.
Wow. And it's such a brave moment. I'm so glad. Thank you for sharing that. And then people are going to say, oh, okay, so it was a brave moment. And then what do you do? Right? Because
Yeah.
there's the brave moment, but then it's like, oh, wow, like where it go? What do I do next? And
Mm.
so what was that like? Was there a feeling of elation? Was there a feeling? I always try to get, so listeners, you're used to me doing this, not getting you just in your head, but also
Mm.
getting into your body. What did that experience feel like for you?
Oh my gosh. It was a feeling of so many feelings. It was freeing, but at the same time, anxiety producing. Like, it was really a moment of all the feelings coming up at once. Um, so when I walked out, I felt like I was taking control, and I felt like, wow, the possibilities are endless. But I also started thinking to myself, like, wow, because there's so many things that are uncertain, and I don't know exactly how I'm going to bring this to life. Um, I had a lot of worries about, like, how will I make this happen? Like, now it's on me. It's all on me to make this happen, which is, I think, what holds a lot of people back from making those leaps, because there's so much uncertainty. There's so much that they've been able to rest in the comfort of the corporate world, or the world that they've lived in. When you go off into the bold world of the unknown, it feels a little bit icky at times, because you're like, oh my gosh, unsafe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
And so I think one of the big things is, I think first acknowledging that we all experience this, right? Because sometimes we might see the leap of faith and just feel like, well, that person is so courageous that they didn't feel all of those emotions. And we're here to tell
Mm.
you, no, no, no. No one gets to skip that messiness. But I think what we need to do, and what we all have, are different tools in our toolkit that help
Mm.
us work through the uncertainty. So what did that look like for you, Tony? What were your coping strategies as all of these emotions, elation and excitement contrasted with, oh my gosh, what now, at the same time? What did you use? What got you through that?
Yeah, I had to first think about all the work that I'd done up to that point, which was to really think about how I'm always evolving. I'm always going to be learning new things, and I have to be compassionate about my own journey. That it's not going to be perfect out of the gate, um, and I'm not going to be creating a business that is, replacing my corporate salary from the moment I leave the nest, if you will. Um, and I think that's important for me to point out, is that I had that feeling already. I knew that it was going to take time to build, and that whatever I initially set out on was not going to be exactly where I end up. So that was like the understanding that whatever I had in my mind was great to have that vision, but also understanding that I can't be so steadfast in saying, this is it and it has to be this. If I don't, then I'm failing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so,
There's a spaciousness and a permission to be able to experiment and explore and play and try out
mm,
different things. Because if you don't try out certain things, you don't get closer to what does feel good. And so it's allowing yourself that space. I love
yeah.
that, Tony. Walk me back a little further back. And I love with the book, right? It's climbing the right mountain,
Yes.
because a lot of times what people find is, and sometimes I use the analogy of the ladder too, they're working their way up here because that's what they think they should be doing. That's what they think is going to get them to that place where they finally feel
Mm.
fulfilled, happy, aligned, peaceful, purposeful, all of those things. And
Mm.
so, what did that look like for you, that journey? Like back in the day when you started to work towards your goals and your definition of success. What do you
Mm.
know now about your definition of success back then? Maybe it was 20 years ago, when you first
Yeah.
started to have that definition.
Yeah, I always had this feeling that I was looking to other people for what the definition of success was. And I think we often do. We get stuck in this trap that success is defined by others and society in general. I mean, look at the internet, right? We have social media that has all of these things that are pushed on us of like, look at what success looks like. There's so many ways that we push the ideals on others. And what we need to do, and what I didn't know at the time, we needed to really define that for ourselves. We don't necessarily have to be the CEO or the CFO or whatever it may be of the company, unless that's truly what we feel is the way that our impact is going to show up. I don't like to kind of paint the picture that we should sell ourselves short. We should be the most that we want to be, and create the biggest impact that we feel that we can make, but do it for the reasons that we want to. And I think ultimately in my journey, what I've realized is that I started to paint this journey, the picture that I wanted to create, the mountain that I was climbing was based on, what people wanted from me from an early age. I was an artist who then became a pre-med major, went to medical school, and then switched into business because I was always feeling like a square peg in a round hole. And although I was successful in all the things that I was doing, I ultimately felt like I was always missing something. There was something that was not right. And ultimately, that's where I realized along that path that maybe I'm not on the right path for me. So
And I think that that definition of success is so important, because so often, and unless we pause and really ask ourselves some poignant, deeper questions, we're not even aware that we're working towards society's definition of success, our parents' definition of success, our
right.
friends' definition of success. And as we're talking about this right now, what even shows up for me is when you start to think about that holistic definition of success. Sometimes it's not even just about the career piece, right? It's, we have $1 trillion industry that talks about you're successful when you're a certain size, you're successful when you're a certain weight, when you
Yeah.
look a certain way, when your hair is a certain way, when you have certain outfits. And then we have social media and technology that can just amplify this.
Yeah.
And from my experience, because we're not aligned sometimes in working towards a definition of success that not only is it not achievable, but that $1 trillion industry doesn't want you to succeed, because then they can't buy you more things to tell you, once you get this, you're enough. Oh, you got there? No, I was teasing you. Look at your face. You got to do the makeup now. And then you get to that place. What's
Yeah.
going on? So there's so many parallels when you think about this definition of success. It's not just when you think about career, it can be in all areas, right? Outwardly, who do you have to be in order to be seen as successful or a successful human being?
Yeah. And it's funny that it never stops, right? I was thinking about this recently, how we have the billionaire space race. And, here you have these billionaires who by all intents and purposes, they've got all the money and the things that they can ever want, right? And now they're, comparing each other against, well, I have a space program. Do you have a space program? If you don't have a space program, then you're not successful. That seems to be the next way that they can compare themselves around, how are they, pushing the needle in the race to space.
Yeah.
So just so it's not about when I have the money, then I'll be successful. No, you'll probably have some other marker of success that you'll be more, working towards, if you continue to chase what society tells you you need to have.
And you talk about this really beautifully in the book, and maybe you want to talk about this for a second now when we talk about happiness and chasing happiness.
Yeah.
And it's actually, you're doing exactly the opposite when you're chasing the happiness. Talk a little bit around what that looks like and why people sometimes get confused with that happiness quotient.
Yeah, no, I love that you brought that up, because it's such an important thing. We can't expect to be happy at the end of that mountain, at the end of the climb, because it may be that what we're pursuing is something that we can have right now. First of all, we can come from a place of being happy, and when you do kind of set your intention of, I want to come from a place of being fulfilled right now, what happens is it changes the way that you climb. It changes your perspective on who you are and who you're being right now, and allows you to find fulfillment in the moments that you have right now. The perspective of happiness comes first, which I can't say that I invented that, or that thought process. Sean Acor, so many great people who have really been following the happiness and fulfillment path, that I really believe is a great way to think about this. But I think they're right. And I think that's why I included that aspect in the book, is that we really need to come from a place of, I have to be satisfied with what's happening right now, and come from that place in order for me to be able to create the things that I want for the future.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so important. And, somewhere I'd like to take you now is when we start to talk about, that room and what was going on in that room
Mm.
with the 30 leaders. You and I both know, because we work with a lot of organizations and cultures, that unfortunately that's not an uncommon occurrence. And
Yeah.
even what was striking me as you were talking about the space programs and what's going on there, it's the same thing that I see over and over and over again, which is leaders operating from ego as opposed from a level
Mm.
of, I like to say, head and heart and humility. And
Yeah.
there's also spectrum, right? We have, what Simon Sinek talks about, the brilliant a-holes that are on one side. And then we have, the other side where it's almost to the point where it's martyrdom, and the individuals like always sacrificing themselves in
Yeah.
terms of the individual. So I think there's this beautiful midpoint. From your perspective, when we think about helping leaders on that journey, what do you think's happening there? Let's talk about the space program, and let's talk about those leaders in those meetings. What's getting them in a way? Because there's ultimately, when people are behaving in a certain way, there is a payoff for behaving in that certain way, right? So
Mm.
they're getting that payoff and they're continuously behaving in that way. And we want to get them out of that cycle and shift it.
Mm.
What do you think's going on there, Tony?
Well, I think one of the biggest parts of this is context is king, I should say. Context is so important. And when they see that, you take a behavior and you repeat it over time and use it in multiple situations over and over and over again, and you expect the same results, you're not going to get the same results. In fact, it starts to wear off over time, that, people see you as that person who comes in with the forceful hammer all the time, and looking for the nail, and nailing hammers. I always think of leadership as being this balance that requires that you have the ability to see the continuum of what you need in a certain context, and the ability to be able to say, okay, sometimes I need to be a little harder on in a situation, to be able to hold people accountable to results, and show them that, what they did in a certain situation wasn't okay. And that I'm not, gonna push over and just let them, take advantage of the situation. But show them that I also have their back, and that I really care deeply. I like to think of it as this, it's a compassionate accountability is the word I keep on playing with. And I love that concept of being the compassionate leader that sees and cares deeply for the people around them, but holds them accountable for the results. And I think that concept helps us to see that it's that the person in front of you knows that you're going to, deal with certain things in different situations as it's required. And then they get to know you for being the person who sees them fully, not just as like a resource,
Right.
but as a person.
Yeah, I think it's so important to have both, right? Because there is this container, right? I use the analogy so often of raising kids and raising employees. And some people are like, you shouldn't be thinking of employees as kids, but it's not about that. It's the parallels around, we all like the kids need boundaries for a reason, right? And it's the
Mm.
same reason within organizations. Like people want to be I'm going to be careful around saying they want to be. People who want to grow want to
Yeah.
be held accountable and to be challenged and to get feedback. I talk a lot about radical candor, which is, direct and clear is kind, and not giving feedback is actually not helping anyone and not serving anyone, because they're not going to see those edges and those opportunities to grow and develop. But it's what's underneath that tone, right? If you're doing the accountability, but then there's no compassion or empathy around the way it's being delivered, it's not going to be received the same way, right? It's such a missed opportunity.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's exactly it. I mean, we need to make sure, one of the things I keep on coming back to is this element of like, you want to grow people and they're in the organization, make sure that they feel as though they're coming to work, not just to get a job done, but that they're actually coming to work to actually become better people through the work that they're doing. And I know that seems odd, but it's this concept of like employee engagement is this like buzzword that's been all thrown around. And I find that employee engagement is actually employer centric. And because it's all about, I want my employees to be engaged in the work. Okay. But how about employee enrichment?
Yeah.
Employee enrichment says that I want my employees to feel like they're becoming better people. They're becoming better people because they're working with us. We're making them better people. And they will be so enriched that they don't want to leave. If they do leave, they're leaving better than when we found them.
I love that language, Tony. The words have so much power, right? So imagine instead of employee engagement and it was employee enrichment,
Yeah.
how people are coming from things, right? Even the leaders and how they're thinking about things. And it reminds me, as I hear you saying that, I talk so much about goals. Goals not just about where you're going to and achieving, and your goals can change all the time. I'm not as concerned about the goals. I'm concerned about who you're becoming as you're working
Exactly.
towards those goals. And that's what I hear when I hear you saying employee enrichment. Like imagine you're creating an environment where somebody continuously grows into the best version of themselves. And guess what? If you want to talk about ROI, companies, there's a good ROI for you, because as people are enriched and continuing to grow into who they are, their potential and the energy and the flow and their productivity and all of that goes sky
Yeah.
off the charts, sky high.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm so glad you said it, because that's what most people, when you start talking about these concepts of employee enrichment, you might lose a few people on the journey. You got to bring it back to the brass tacks of what does this mean to me as a business owner? Like, why would I want to do that? Well, because at the end of the day, there's so many ripple effects of that impact. And I think that's where it comes down to. And to come back to your initial question, which is to say, why is this important for the employee beyond the big picture enrichment? But they need to have that feedback. They want to know that I'm not just going to get all sugar coated. Radical candor, those things that are going to make sure that they're not just getting the positive, they're getting the negatives too, so they can be enriched. They can be propelled and moved forward from where they started from. I think that's the important concept behind this. And when they do that, they feel more engaged for sure. It's just it's a side effect, not the main purpose.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit around your experience with coaching or being a trusted advisor. And I
Mhm.
always like to say, as a coach, it's like you're wearing a mentor hat, consultant hat, coaching hat, trusted advisor, thought partner hat,
Yeah.
all of these hats. What surprises you the most? Like when you start to continue to, like, as you're working with leaders and going on these journeys with people, what surprises you or what surprises your clients when they start to
Mhm.
engage in that coaching journey?
Yeah. Well, first of all, when they first come into coaching, they have one idea about what it is. And when you start to have conversations, the first few conversations, you start to see that there's a deeper underlying feeling that they've unlocked around what is possible. I kind of see it as like they're breathing deeper than they ever have before. And I think that's really apropos to the whole idea of inspiration, because inspiration is breathing life into, or something like that. That's where the word inspire comes from. And I think that's where I love seeing people come from, where they say like, oh, I'd really like to have my teams be, working better together, or, I'm feeling a little bit, like there's something else that we should be doing. And there's this like something missing. And then as we have a conversation, there might be like, oh, I want to work on time management and all these like these buzzword things that are at the surface of what they want to work on. And when we get to the core, it starts to get into this element of like, oh my gosh, like I've been playing small. I've been focusing on the wrong things. And that's what's holding me back from being the person I want to be. And when I really get clear to who it is I want on the inside, then that radiates and it creates an impact on other people around me. And they start to see that show up. And I think that's at the core of a lot of the conversations that I've had. And that's what, I often say that it's coaching, but it's really getting people to see deeper, on many different levels. And that might also mean throwing some ideas out to them that might be, getting them to lead the horse to water, to get them to see their own ideas in bigger ways.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you're sharing there. To me, it's so much about the inward journey, and they might start at one level, but then it goes down
Mhm.
another layer and another layer and another layer. And sometimes that's also about comfort. There's a level of vulnerability, and you don't get to A to Z or A to Z for my American listeners right away, right? It's a journey that you get to go on. And I love the way you spoke about inspiration, because that's why I call this podcast Inspirational Leadership, because to me, that's what inspiration looks like. And of course, that's your chief inspirational officer. I love that
Yeah,
title,
thank you.
because it feels like, as I hear that, that's what you're trying to evoke in others, right? To help them get to that place.
Yeah.
What's been interesting for you as you've gone onto your journey and been doing more work with clients in coaching and training and speaking? How are you growing as a leader?
Ooh. So, first of all, what I've found is that the more and more I don't run away from my past, you made me think about this. The more that I embrace my past, the more I become aligned with how to use it as a tool for moving forward, and how to help others to use their past as a way to move forward. I think about it from the perspective of like, even the podcast, the virtual campfire, when I get people to reflect on the things that they've done and what has really changed them, um, it's really helped them to see that, wow, that thing I went through is the very thing that helps me to help others.
Mm.
Um, and so I think from that perspective, that's what I've really leaned into. When you start a coaching business, when you start a business where you're helping leaders, it's often like, well, you can go anywhere with that, but like, what exactly is it that you do and who do you serve? And so for me, I had to tap into going deeper, figure out who is it that I'm for. And that's where the gold was. I had to go back into my story, dig out some of those pieces that really made me who I am. And that is what made me, create the right connection with the right people.
Mm. So
Yeah.
take a second to tell us now, like as you went through that journey, who did you recognize that you're most called to serve?
Yeah. And so I always say they're accomplished leaders, because there are people who have done great things in the past. Oftentimes they diminish them. They're, kind of like, oh yeah, it was no big deal, but they are truly accomplished. And usually there's this place where they just feel like there's got to be more to life than what I'm experiencing right now. There's something missing. And they know that with the right key to unlock that next step, they'll be able to move in some big way. They know there's something big on the horizon. They just don't have the ability to see it clearly. And so that's what I started to see, is that if they're willing to have that deep conversation, like I did when I left the boardroom, I had this one quote stuck with me, and it's from another coach. If you're willing to feel everything, you can have anything. And I love that quote because it really got me into this place of saying, like, if I'm willing to go through a deep transformation, just like I'd take other people through deep transformation, then I can have just about anything I want. And that to me is where if we're willing to go in a deep transformation, if you're a leader who's accomplished, who's feeling stuck, and you're willing to go in a deep transformation to get out of your box that you think you're sitting in, then I'm your guy, your person. And I think that's really what I uncovered through that journey.
I love it. One of the things that we talk a lot about on the podcast, Tony, is that we're all a work in progress and we all have such a learning and growth. So I'm wondering what jumps out at you and when we look back, we recognize, oh, those were actually the poignant moments where we learned a lot about ourselves. Yeah. What shows up for you if you were to look back and think of something where, a mistake occurred, a failure, something that at the time felt really, really difficult, but I'm sure now in retrospect, there might've been some good learning and growth for you.
Oh yeah. I mean, there's an element of not just mistakes. I would say they're more those moments that like were pivotal in the journey. And I would say, the first time you get laid off, right? And I remember getting laid off from a job, and I felt like I was completely blindsided, and I felt completely demoralized, and I just didn't know what to do with myself. And at that point, you start questioning everything, your worth, you're like, what do you do now? And you've worked so hard to get to that point, and you think of all these things, and that moment was a pivotal point because it made me think, okay, now what can I create? What does this create for me? And that didn't happen overnight, but that was the thing that really changed the game for me and got me thinking, there's always a way to create something different if you're willing to go on the journey. And so that was one of the biggest ones. The other one came at a point along the way where it was actually earlier on when I realized that I wanted to do something, a different career. I wanted to go into like business development. And I remember people telling me, oh, well, you don't have an Ivy League degree. You don't have this. And this is all in hindsight, of course. And I used to listen to all this well-meaning advice, and people would tell me like, this is, the real deal. This is how, it's how things work in the world. And I used to tell myself like, wow, okay, that's just the way it is, I guess. And just head down and continue to do what I'm doing. And I look back in those events like that, and I say to myself, like, no, you don't have to accept other people's opinions. That's just an opinion. That's what they think. And if I want something badly enough, I just have to be able to be willing to do the work, be willing to look at, the pathway it's going to take to get there. There are certain things in the world that may not be easy to get to. Maybe if I decided I really wanted to be a doctor, then I would have to go back to school and do that, or, choose a way to become closer to that path. I think ultimately those are the things that I always remember, is those moments when people say you can't.
Yeah. And it's coming, that where they're coming from, it's trying to be well-meaning because they think they're advising. What they don't really realize that they're projecting their own limitations on you.
Yeah.
And just because that wasn't the path for them doesn't mean we can show you all everything where someone said you can't do it. I can show you somebody else that did do it. Right. So It might have taken a little bit of creativity, a little bit of sweat and grind. It might have required going about things a different way, but it's such a great example because we can be limited. And I can think of many times where I've spoken even with clients who are like, well, I'm 50, so it's too late, or I'm 55, so it's too late. And I've talked about this on the show, and I give examples of 73-year-olds who went back to school and went into a completely different profession. So that I'm like, yeah, I'm not gonna say yes to that. I'm not gonna play into her encourage your story. It's a story. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a story. I hear the story, but we're not going to continue with that story because I don't think that story is working for you. So I love where you're going with those limitations, because I think that we can both limit ourselves and other people can limit us as well.
Yeah. It makes me think about the fact that we can't put all our value into one particular thing. Like we oftentimes, and this is exactly where I found myself, and I hadn't really thought about this until this very moment, is this element of like, when you push all of your effort and all of your energy into this one pathway, and then you find yourself hitting a wall, and then someone says like, that's it, sorry, that's not going to serve you well. That's where burnout comes in. When you feel like, okay, well, now what do I do? If I've put all my value and effort into one thing, and now I've been told I can't do that. I can't be the thing that I want to be. So you have to be able to be open to being wrong, or open to being, be able to pivot and move into other directions, and see that your value is not tied up in one thing, but you contain multitudes, and you're able to be whatever you'd like to be. And you can move from one thing to create something else.
Yes. Yeah. And that perseverance too, right? What's jumping out at me as you were saying this, I know you and I both are part of Rich Litvin's community, and I
Yeah.
remember listening to his podcast last week, and he interviewed this fascinating gentleman who's 30 years old, from Iraq originally, in the Netherlands right now, blind since he was born. And how many times, again, his parents who loved him, who said, we can't, you can't do that. And he said, yes, I can. And he wanted to get into computer programming. Well, nobody's ever done that before. Well, I'm going to be the first person, and had to like a 2-year battle in order to get them to do that. And it was so interesting to hear all of his stories. And it again was a reminder that, in that one where you could find it even easier to say, well, with that one, it is really like it's never been done. But like example, things that have never been done. So I think it's us also challenging ourselves and getting out, disrupting our thinking, as I was hearing you say that, because, it's interesting. I can think of times where I noticed, like you're saying, like I was hitting the wall, it wasn't working. And then I said, I'm just going to like step away and get completely away from this, because my energy and mindset right now, I'm not going to get anywhere. And I might go back and look at this 2 days from now. All of a sudden it looks completely different. So it's even recognizing like, where's our energy in that moment? And if you're in a pushing energy, you might not in that moment be able to get out of the pushing energy. It's going to take a little bit. So you leave, and then you revisit when your energy feels very different, because now all of a sudden it's like, oh, how come I didn't see that before? Like I even notice when I sometimes go for a walk, I just notice I'm in a pushing energy. This isn't working for me. I'm going to go outside. 45 minutes later, I come back. Wow, that looks so different than 45 minutes ago.
It's funny because you mentioned this, and one of my guideposts is, one of the things in my book that I mentioned, not the guidepost, but one of the things I talk about there, and I've been talking about for years, is expand your vision, narrow your focus. And it's just one of those things where it's like, when you're hitting that wall, it's time to step away and expand your vision, see what's out there. And maybe you see a possibility you didn't see before. And then once you do, don't get overwhelmed, like narrow it down and figure out what it is that you can execute on in that moment. Then focus on that. It seems so like, commonsensical, but I think ultimately we sometimes need that reminder of like, yeah, well, sometimes walls just seem like that's my world. And you need to step away.
Yeah. And one of the things I love so much about coaching, either when I'm coach, because I always work with a coach for the rest of my life, because of course I believe in coaching. So if I'm being coached, or when I'm coaching my clients, we can be in this tunnel vision. And then all of a sudden, through asking different questions, the perspective starts opening. And then you're like, wow, an hour later, you've got all these ideas where an hour earlier it felt like it wasn't possible.
And then you have to actually do the work.
Yeah. Then there's that whole execution part. However, sometimes you might recognize you're the visionary, and you have other people with wonderful skill sets who are your executioners, who can go out there and make it happen.
Exactly. It's so true. And that's one of the things that's so funny is that, it can be overwhelming when you are, running a business or a leader of a company and you feel like I have to do it all. And like, once I've identified this thing, then it's on me to make it happen. And like, no, part of like really, being the person who steps away from that wall is think about, okay, maybe I'm not the one. Maybe what I'm trying to accomplish is not for me to accomplish, but for me to be the person who helps to unleash that into the world and then get other people enlisted into that vision. So
Yes, because this is as you're in your zone of genius and then you put somebody else in their zone of genius, it frees you up. Now you give
yeah,
somebody else an opportunity to be in their zone of genius. And to me, which I'm such a big fan of co-creating, and ultimately, you listen to any of the most successful CEOs, and they'll always say, "Oh yeah, I hire people much smarter than me." But it's not even about that, right? They hire people with different skill sets because they know they're in
mm,
their zone of genius. You've got all of these people working in their zone of genius together. You create something so much bigger and so much more powerful than you
yeah,
could ever do on your own. And I just think it's such a blessing to be able to have other people and bring them in. I remember even back in the day with my website, and I kept on playing around and I was like, oh, I could just hire a copywriter. That's their gift. And then it's
mm,
so easy. Like I just sit there, I'm very verbal. I sit there, I speak, and then, 45 minutes are like, oh, I'm like, I said that. Thank you. Like, because they can reflect it back to you because they're doing their zone of genius, and it feels good because they get to be using their gifts and talents. I'm
yeah.
using my gifts and talents. We're creating something together and it feels so good.
Yeah, no, it's amazing when you start to realize that you can step away from you know, the activity of the thinking and the doing all the time. You're constantly in that cycle because it's very draining to be feeling that you have to do it all.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
So, Tony, as we start to wrap up today's conversation, I always like to give my guests an opportunity to leave them with a final thought, whatever is showing up for you in this moment.
Mm. Well, one of the things that has been really on my mind is that like what you put out is what you get back, right? And this element of right now, a lot of people, their anxiety is high. There's a lot of like emotional turmoil in the world right now as we come back together. And I just think about how leaders and professionals of all types who are coming back together, like think about how you're showing up and know that the ripple you put out, what you put out, is what you'll get back. So if you want people to react positively to you, make sure that you're putting out the right vibe for yourself, you know? So I think
Yeah.
that's what's really coming to mind right now is this importance of like how we come together in the most positive way.
Yeah,
Starts
I,
with
I
you.
love what you say there because it gives so much empowerment, right? We always have a choice, always around how
Mm,
we show up, right? And we can have such an impact on the people around us based on how we show up and the energy we
yeah.
put out and what we focus on and what we decide not to focus on. Because sometimes when we're focusing on the negative, it's just putting more energy into it. And
Yeah.
I think that's some really, really wise words.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one. I've had some coaching clients of mine who've like come back into the workplace and they've had some challenges where it's like their anxiety is high, and I've told them, I said, look, if you're finding that you're triggered in the moment you're entering, like just like recognize that and take a moment to make sure that you get yourself prepared for that. If you're not feeling like you're ready to really step into that room, then maybe it's not the right time for you to step into the room. Maybe you need to be a little more compassionate with yourself. But to create that pause, the moment of pause before you step in and then, enter a new environment or the environment that you've been in the past, and then feel all of the feelings that are going to show up. Um, you got to prepare yourself. It's not an
Yeah.
easy thing.
Yeah, I think that's important, acknowledging and checking in with yourself too, and saying, what are my needs here? What needs are not being met, which is
Yeah.
very individual to each of us.
Mm, beautiful.
Wonderful. Tony, where can people learn more about you and your work?
Well, the best place to start is inspiredpurposecoach.com. where you can take my leadership journey assessment, which is a great tool to find out where you are now and where you'd like to be. And then you can pick up my book on Amazon, wherever you are in the world. It's Climbing the Right Mountain. You can find it on Amazon. And I'm on social media, so you can find me wherever you are in social media.
And I will share all of that in the show notes as well. Thank you so much for being here today, Tony.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much for being an amazing host.
Thanks, Tony. Wherever you are in the world right now, we're sending you love. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Bye-bye.